Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's web seminar, Beyond the Safety Net, Findings from a 2-Year Initiative to Transform Housing Providers into College Success Programs. I want to start by thanking everyone for taking the time to be here. Hope everyone is having a nice summer and getting some summer vacations in. And let's, with that, jump right in. We've got a lot of material to cover. Today's presentation is being recorded, and it'll also be posted with the presentation on our website. So let's start as we always do and look at, make sure everyone has the information they need to participate. You've got the phone number and the access code here, and then really hope that you will type your questions in as you have them. You know, there's a lot of information that's going to be shared about, progress that different organizations have made, and we have one provider who will be presenting. She can provide follow-up information on the practice implications and changes. Again, it just makes it the most interesting part of our conversation. All right, so what are we going to cover on today's agenda? First, we're going to set the stage a little bit, talk about why this initiative focused on post-secondary education. Then we're going to really dive into what this initiative was. It's called Beyond the Safety Net. So what was it? We've been doing it for a 1-year pilot, 2 years of active project. Where did we see the progress? Where didn't we see the progress that we thought we would? Then we're going to turn it over to New Alternatives from San Diego to really share the point of view of someone who, really walked this walk, took this journey with us, and is going to share what that was like and what she has seen change and what she has seen that hasn't. Then we're going to pull up and really talk about, okay, so we've been doing this for 3 years now. So what? What does it mean for the whole state? What does it mean for all young people who are transitioning out of a system of care? So talk about lessons learned and policy implications, and then we'll wrap up with a Q&A as always. So our presenters today, myself, Amy Lemley, Executive Director with John Burton Advocates for Youth. Then very happy, we're joined by Carol Lockwood, who is a Program Manager of New Alternatives in San Diego County. And then the leader of our initiative for the last 3 years is Simone Turek-Lee. She is the Acting Director of Housing and Health here at John Burton Advocates for Youth and has spearheaded this initiative and has a lot of great information to share about how it has gone. But before we do that, just want to step back and say, why did we do this? So why did we focus on post-secondary education? So you see on the slide there, there's no doubt about it. Higher education has a very powerful impact on the life of us all. You can see it, the lower unemployment rates, higher earnings, lower rates of incarceration, improved health outcomes, civic participation. It even has an intergenerational impact on the children of a person who goes to college, and also increased career satisfaction. So many, if not most of us on this web seminar today, may have had the opportunity to pursue post-secondary education and perhaps are benefiting from many of these really great, outcomes. And of course, we want that for young people who are, transitioning out of foster care, the juvenile probation system, and who've experienced homelessness. The way I think about it is post-secondary education, the one thing that's going to improve the economic security of young people? Probably not that alone, kind of necessary, but not sufficient. But when I think about and when the evidence, indicates what is the step we need to take to dramatically improve the odds young people are going to experience that economic security, post-secondary education is a big part of it. So we know it's a positive thing. And then kind of in came extended foster care. Past almost 10 years ago. We're going to have a big party next year, or at least some opportunity to step back and really think carefully about this policy. But it was a game changer because, the system previously, for many, if not most young people in most jurisdictions ended at age 18 or 19. And so with Care Now Till 21, it really presented a really powerful opportunity to rethink higher education, really to rethink education as a whole. And a few different things inform that. One is the vast majority of non-minor dependents have a high school credential. So by age 19, 71%. And so while we want that percentage to be higher, it's important to note that 71% do. By age 21, it's a full 84. And so the normative experience for a non-minor dependent, for 7 out of 10 non-minor dependents, is post-secondary education. That can include a traditional degree path or a career and technical education program. Couple that with the fact that more than the vast majority, almost all young people, as you see on the far right-hand part of the slide, they indicate they want to go to college. 85.5% at age 17, 93.6% at age 19. So this isn't us wanting something for young people. This is young people wanting this for themselves. And both of these figures, or all four of these figures, are from the Cal Youth Study. And so we have extended foster care. We have young people who largely have high school diplomas, and we have an interest in higher education among young people. So what do we do with that? That's the question we asked ourselves 3 years ago. Where do we start? How do we start moving the needle on post-secondary education? And the conclusion we came to was we want to start with funded housing providers. So here on the slide, you see this was our in with this initiative, 3 different programs. We thought, let's start with the entities who are serving these young people at the kind of most immediate unit of service, the providers who are, caring for them, who are providing them housing, or who are providing them supportive services. And so the participants in the initiative fall into one of these 3 groups. The first one is THPP NMD, formerly known as THP Plus Foster Care. So we have almost 2,000 young people in THPP NMD as of April 1st, 2019. We have a rate, a newly adopted rate as of July 1st of a little over 3,700, and we have 68 providers. Going counterclockwise, we have THP Plus. Almost the exact same number of young people were served in fiscal year 18. The rate is notably less. It's about $1,000 less. The average monthly rate is $2,540, and we have 54 providers. And then a third and much smaller category, both of providers and notably of funding, is Runaway and Homeless Youth Act programs, which are also included. The Transitional Living Program, $48 million is available federally, and that means as in the whole country. And there are 16 funded providers in California. So kind of our rationale was, instead of starting with a blank slate, let's go to the providers that are getting public funding to serve these young people and see if there's a way to modify the practice, to reorient it towards post-secondary education using the funding that they currently receive, and to see to what extent that is possible. Where is it possible? Where do we come up short? And so that's what I'm going to start with. And from here, I'm going to really hand it over to Simone, who's going to talk about the kind of technical assistance they received and the impact that it had.
Thanks, Amy. So as Amy mentioned, we just embarked on really what was a 3-year journey to explore how to improve the post-secondary educational outcomes of current and former foster youth, probation youth, and homeless youth, not from the post-secondary education sector, really, but with existing students, but really from the housing provider perspective is where we started, with the idea that any of these young people could be in post-secondary education. Why are some not? How do we get them there? How do we help those that are there persist and complete? And so we worked with housing providers across the state to really transform their programs based on a core practice model that you see there on the screen. It's really a collection of activities that kind of in concert transform or reorient an organization to really prioritize post-secondary education in a way that other organizations maybe don't. There are 8 practice areas that we ask these organizations to really work on to develop practices and policies in. I'm not going to go into the content of each of these for the sake of time, but you can certainly do a deep dive if you visit that URL on the screen. And then later in the webinar, I will touch on some of these areas and what's included. But really, you know, being part of this initiative meant to some extent really agreeing to integrate these practices into your program. So how did we do this? So we offered the participating programs training. We specifically held 6 webinars for this cohort. We hosted a bunch of other webinars on related topics, but really had 6 kind of very tailored webinars related to the core practice model and to these providers. We provided about 369 hours of individual and small group, what we call, you know, technical assistance, really to support goals that they developed based on the core practice model at the start of the initiative. We hosted 3 in-person convenings, and that provided an opportunity for organizations to learn from their peers, to share what they were doing, and to really have that kind of learning community experience. And then we developed a number of practice tools specifically tailored with these programs in mind and in helping them kind of to adopt the core practice model. So kind of stepping back a little bit, so this initiative, this 2-year initiative, was funded by the California Wellness Foundation, and we definitely want to acknowledge them in just kind of seeing the vision that we saw, understanding the importance and understanding the bigger picture and kind of what the end game was really here. And part of it was stepping back, as Amy said, and really looking at the sector as a whole and seeing how we can really move the needle on these outcomes. So as I said, it's a 2-year initiative preceded by a year-long pilot, 37 housing programs, serving 1,796 youth across 18 counties participated. So you can see, and we started out with 36 programs, so you probably have heard us use both figures, but we landed at 37. And you can see on the screen kind of the breakdown. Amy talked about, you know, the different providers, the different programs that exist. Certainly there's other programs for homeless youth in our state, but the 2 programs focusing on current and former foster youth being THP NMD and THP Plus, and then other organizations that had a number of different types of homeless youth programs for youth that, you know, may or may not have foster care histories. Some of them may have been in and out of foster care. Some of them may have never touched the system, but really all of the organizations, you know, were providing one of those programs that you see on the screen. So on the right-hand side of the screen is the regional breakdown. As you can see, you know, heavy in Southern California, but some representation really in each region of the state. So I imagine the next natural question is, you know, who are these programs? Who are these superheroes? Like I said, we had 2 groups. So one that started with us in 2016 during the pilot, and you know, this group is all THPP, NMD, and THP Plus programs. So we started out, like really, Amy said, thinking about extended foster care, and so we really started there. And although some of these organizations also serve homeless youth, you know, they all had either THPP, NMD, and or THP Plus programs. This second cohort, which joined us for the 2-year initiative and brought us to 37, was more of a mix between foster care and homeless youth providers. You'll see the county or the counties listed next to the organizations. And just to clarify, you know, these are the programs within the organization that participated. So in some cases, you're probably saying, wait, I know that organization there has programs in like 5 different counties, but I only see one. That's because that is the one that participated. So those are the counties that you see listed next to the organization's name. So I really want to step back, take a moment, really thank and acknowledge these 37 programs. They didn't have to do this. They wanted to do this. They were fearless. They came in transparent, like, look, this is what we struggle with. It's not easy to support these populations with post-secondary education. If it was, we'd frankly see a much higher rate of these young people across the state enrolling in and completing college. These young people face real obstacles to education, and addressing these obstacles as a provider is not easy. So you're really looking at the go-to providers here if you want to know, you know, what are the practices that promote enrollment, retention, and completion. They know that. So thank you to all of you. If you're on the web seminar, we've thoroughly enjoyed working with all of you over the last 2 to 3 years. Oops, and my little celebration there that popped up. So next, we'll talk about areas of notable progress. You know, this is really how we measured each program's progress in the core practice model. We went into this, we knew we wanted to be able to see where we started, where we ended, and we knew that it was more than just like how many youth are enrolled in college. It's like, how do you support these young people? And what are those practices? So we had them take an assessment, kind of auditing their practices and policies related to supporting youth with post-secondary education in the beginning of the initiative, and then midway through once they kind of completed the bulk of the training that we offered. And you'll get an idea here of some of the practices included in the core practice model. This is certainly not exhaustive, but the assessment and the model includes much more, but you know, way too much to cover in today's web seminar. So we'll start here. This practice area is academic-focused case management. This is really what I view as the foundation for much of the core practice model. I included 3 measures here to share. The first row being case managers are well-versed on post-secondary education. As you can see at the start of the initiative in fall 2017, 53% of programs felt that their case managers were well-versed on post-secondary education. In fall 2018, this bumped up to 75%. The next one, case managers are actively supporting participants with enrolling, completing matriculation, applying for and receiving financial aid, and accessing priority enrollment. So it's about being hands-on with these activities. We started at 72%. We arrived at 88%. And then case managers are familiar with the academic calendar and with students' individual calendars in order to help them, remind them about critical dates, support them during stressful times, and assist them in balancing competing priorities. You know, this is one that people kind of, I think, when you see it, you're like, is that, how important is that? It's very important. What we learned along the way is that this is really a critical component of how do you engage with this population that's in school? How do you make them feel understood, supported, you know, someone's there with them? We know, we know what May means. We know what September means. Like, we know what these certain months in the academic calendar mean, and we are here to support you during those activities, whether it's finals, whether it's, enrolling, whether it's priority enrollment. You know, we know what these are. So that's really what that one's about. And we started at 50%, and that bumped up to 66%. So the next area is academic support, obviously an important one. So program supports youth in accessing tutoring or other academic support. We started at 42%, arrived at 53%. The program develops opportunities for youth to learn the skills necessary to be a successful student, such as how to study, time management, note-taking, how to read a syllabus, etc. Started at 50%, arrived at 66%. Program supports and encourages students to reach out to professors early on in the semester to establish a relationship and ask for assistance when needed. Started at 69%, got to 91%. This was an area, so one of our former staff members was a college professor also, and she really helped us understand the importance and the role that the professors can play. You know, a lot of our, ideas are, send youth to the support programs, which is absolutely, and you'll see on, I think, the next slide, important. But there's also this piece of how can the professors be involved? When young people are connecting with their teachers early on, and all of us who have been through school probably know this, but it's not really something we think about. When you get in trouble, when you didn't do that paper, or you get a bad grade in your final and you want to ask for extra credit, or you miss some classes and you need a little bit of understanding, having that relationship. We all know relationship makes the world go round, right? Knowing somebody and having a friend there can make a huge difference. So we really talked a lot about this, and it was a great area of growth. So as I mentioned, relationships with campuses. So the program has a strong working relationship with the foster youth and or homeless youth contacts at all or most of the local campuses and regularly refers youth to them. So this, again, I also see as a very foundational element of the core practice model. It really enables programs to do a lot of the other things we're asking them to do in the core practice model. If they have those relationships, it makes a lot of the other stuff a lot easier. And it really opens up the option to partner with the campus on how you kind of wrap services around a young person. So we started at 36% there and went to 69%. We were really excited about this progress because, as you can see, it wasn't something that was largely on people's radar in the beginning of the initiative, and it's arguably one of the most important components of the model. And so we were really pleased with the progress. And then the program tracks post-secondary education data or outcomes of their youth participants. Started at 75%, landed at 84%. So financial aid, this was a really important area as well. Obviously, you got to pay for school. And financial aid is not simple. I think we all, if we've been through school and we've had any experience with financial aid, it is complicated and it is often hard to understand how to navigate, and we need help with it. So first, the program ensures that all current and potential students are completing the FAFSA and related financial aid forms by their priority deadlines. Started at 69%, made it to 88%. I will say, in some of these cases, providers said, you know, now that we've had this training and we see what actually is really part of really helping youth do these things thoroughly, I don't know if I would actually have gone back and said in my earlier assessment, yes, we do this adequately. You know, some of them kind of checked their existing practices and policies and said, you know, actually I thought we were doing this adequately, but now that I see kind of all that goes into it and the full financial aid process, I don't think we were. So it was a good kind of realization about what all goes into supporting youth with financial aid. One of those pieces is programs ensure that students are following up and submitting any additional documentation requested of them by their school to complete the process after they fill out the FAFSA, because the FAFSA is step one. There's many other steps after that. So we started at 67%, made it to 84%. If a student accrues student debt, the program assists the student with negotiating payment arrangements immediately and brainstorming methods of repayment. Started at 44%, went to 59%. And then for homeless youth providers, because the verification process for homeless students is extremely onerous compared to what it is at this point for foster youth. Now we have an automated verification system for foster youth. So for homeless youth providers, we ask them, you know, if they ensure that every year youth are in school, are they ensuring that that youth is verifying their status for financial aid? So we started at 40% there and went to 60%. I think it's our second to last section here, college-going culture. So the program holds college-themed events for youth, went from 39% to 53%. And then the program has college-themed program space or offices, went from 39% to 63%. This is one of those things similar to one I mentioned earlier, where you kind of look at it and you're like, how important is that? Having program space that has a visual, visuals about college, how important can that be? It's one of those very low barrier things that can make a huge difference. And programs experienced that in the initiative. And they were like, wow, this is like easy to do. And why didn't we do it a year ago? And, the impact that your physical environment can have on you is significant. And, if you've ever looked into kind of studies on youth-informed space and, this is a really important thing to do and very easy to do. And it's all part of shifting the way that we think about things, shifting our culture as an agency or as a sector, as we'll talk about later, and really understanding that we should be putting post-secondary education in the forefront of what we do and not kind of an afterthought. And then lastly here, minimizing the work obligation. So this practice area was one that we engaged in a lot of discussion about. There's a lot of pressure on programs to enforce work requirements. Understandably, programs want their youth to be self-sufficient upon exit from their program. They want them to have an income. However, what we do know is that a living wage job is much less likely when you just have a high school diploma. So these programs, which range in length, but some are, up to 2 or even 3 years, are a great opportunity for youth to pursue some sort of education and training post-high school. It doesn't have to be the degree path. There are plenty of short-term certificate programs at our community colleges that will set youth on a career path with a living wage. And we know that many of these youth, for them doing both work and school is a recipe for failure. It's not the best way to set them up for success. And what's going to go, it's not going to be the job, it's going to be school. So this practice is really about minimizing that pressure, minimizing that work obligation. So the program has a work requirement. So 33% started out with a work requirement, and then we got down to 23%. And then of that 23% that still have work requirements, 43% are county enforced, and then 57% enforce the requirements independently. So that's something to think about too, is kind of where are those requirements coming from. The program provides an adequate monthly stipend or allowance. And for this one, we elaborated a little bit, but it's not on the screen. It's, when combined with financial aid, does the stipend that you provide, adequately cover costs so that the young person wouldn't have to also work. And so they start at 61%, made it to 78%. And then lastly, the program builds in financial incentives that reinforce college enrollment, persistence, and success, or discounted rent for students, which was a really cool thing that some providers were doing. So we talked about kind of practice and policies. In addition to measuring those things, we also looked at youth enrollment rates. Understanding that practice and policy change would take a while to actually impact enrollment rates, we still hoped that over the course of the initiative, we would see some progress in this area, and we did. This table shows fall to fall enrollment rates from just before the initiative started to midway through. So, you look at the number of youth that were in these programs in 2017, 1,674. We know that that number is not static. It's going to vary, based on entrance and exit turnover. In 2018, 1,796 youth were in the programs. And so 50% of those youth in 2017 were enrolled or had completed. And this includes vocational schools, community colleges, CSUs, UCs, private schools, any post-secondary education institution. That's what that 50% is, or if they had completed a certificate, a degree, a license. And then that number bumped up to 56% in fall 2018. We also, anecdotally, providers have reported that since participating in the initiative, youth in their programs are less likely to lose their financial aid, and I think Carol will talk a little bit about that. And they attribute that really to changing up their case management style to one that provides kind of more frequent check-ins. We have a tool to assist with that we developed, and really to becoming more versed on financial aid. And then we also have seen on an individual level for programs some really great enrollment progress. One provider in particular, doubled the number of youth that were enrolled during the initiative. So we've definitely seen progress that we're really excited about. And on that note, I want to turn it over to Carol Lockwood with New Alternatives in San Diego to talk a little bit about, let's dial it back. Let's look at kind of what did one program do in this initiative to kind of illustrate what this looked like on a ground level.
Thank you, Simone. Good morning, everyone. I'm Carol Lockwood, Program Manager for the New Alternatives Transitional Housing Programs in San Diego County. I just have to mention my voice. I just got over a cold, so excuse me as I take sips of water, and hopefully my voice will last throughout the webinar. I'm happy to be a part of this webinar and share my experience of participating in the Beyond the Safety Net cohort. I'll start by briefly describing our programs and the services that we provide, and then I will discuss the key focus areas and the changes that were implemented within our agency. So New Alternatives provides services in San Diego County and Orange County to current and former foster youth. New Alternatives in San Diego County, which I'll be speaking about, has 3 transitional housing programs for current and former foster youth. And I'm sure many of you are already familiar with these programs, but we have the THP Plus program, which is former foster probation youth ages 18 to 24. And we have the THPP non-minor dependent, which we have 60 youth in that in our agency with that are non-minor dependents that are current foster probation youth, ages 18 to 21. And then we have a program that's specific to San Diego County former foster youth, which is TYH, Transitional Youth Housing, and we have 20 youth in that program, and they may and may not be eligible for THP Plus. They are youth that were in San Diego placement on or after their 16th birthday, or have spent a significant amount of time in San Diego foster care. So like I said, they may not be eligible for THP Plus or THP NMD, so it opened the door to get those youth and services as well within San Diego County. So between those three housing programs, we have up to 145 youth at any given time that we are providing with case management and supportive services. Services include home management, daily living skills, budgeting, employment, and educational support. So when I was first presented with the opportunity to be a part of the Beyond the Safety Net cohort, I felt that our agency had a pretty good understanding of how to support our current and former foster youth with their post-secondary education goals. However, once I began to dive into the different layers that are involved and get feedback from some of the other providers that were participating in the cohort and learned about the core practice model, it became clear that we had some significant improvements to make within our programs. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the first area of the core practice model that we focused on was in regard to campus connection, much like Simone was talking about. San Diego has 12 main colleges and universities throughout the county, which makes it very difficult for us to be up to date with important information that is relevant to each school. This includes deadlines for registration, the drop dates for classes, when midterms are, final exams, etc. Also includes contact information for the campus liaisons that work specifically with the current and former foster youth to ensure that they are getting the support or tutoring they might need throughout the semester. Let me take a sip real quick. So being that the youth in our agency are spread throughout the county and attending many different colleges, we determined that the best course of action would be for our agency staff to become the experts on each campus. So to do this, we assigned a staff member to each of the 12 colleges and universities, and that staff member became responsible for obtaining up-to-date information on that specific college each semester. So that information includes what I previously mentioned as far as important dates and deadlines, the on-campus contact for foster youth liaisons, maps of the campus, the EOPS information, campus job opportunities, tutoring options, library hours, and so on. So this information is compiled into a binder, and that's made available for both other staff members and youth in the program. We also saw the need for stronger connections with campus liaisons. So we, being that we're such a large county and it's hard to get all of our youth together to meet individuals, we just began inviting the EOPS counselors and liaisons from the various colleges to come introduce themselves and speak to our staff at our staff meetings each month. So that was able to get us a face-to-face connection with them, get familiar with them, have them learn about the population that we serve and how we can work together to support the youth. And we found that when we reached out to these campuses for this, they were very willing to set time aside so that we could collaborate on how to best support our mutual students. Another area we realized could use some improvement was having more academic-focused case management services, like Simone mentioned. Prior to our participation in the cohort, our staff would assist students on a case-by-case basis with registering for classes, completing the FAFSA and CHAFE applications, and checking in on how students were doing. And while we thought we were doing okay in this area, we really realized that we needed much more structure to ensure that each student's individual needs were being met. Too many students were struggling, and we were often not being made aware of the struggles until it was too late. This included students not dropping classes before the drop date, students not meeting the required 2.0 GPA, and therefore no longer being eligible for financial aid, and students withdrawing from classes without telling us and then still accepting their financial aid disbursements, which affected them down the line. So to create more structure around the post-secondary education support, we developed a checklist for the student and their case manager to complete each semester. And I think that's the next slide. So here's the checklist we created, and it includes kind of the stuff I just mentioned, the drop date for classes. It has the student's class schedule for the semester, dates of midterms, final exams, the contact for the EOPS liaisons, and what aid the student is receiving and when they get that aid. So this is designed to be completed with the student and the case manager each semester. And it also includes other discussion topics such as the tutoring options, study practices, importance of maintaining that 2.0 GPA, and like Simone mentioned, the benefits of utilizing a professor's office hours and checking in and getting that support. It also tracks the required EOPS meetings, and ideally that would be then when the program staff is able to attend those meetings with the student to get more of that team approach to supporting them. And the checklist just overall allows for case managers to be more engaged with the students and to know that they're covering their bases with each student individually. Can we jump back to the previous slide again? So just our final goal was to create a college-going culture throughout our physical office space, as well as within ourselves and in the direct services we provide to our youth. We wanted there to be more awareness and an overall message to our youth that we support education and that it is possible for them to achieve their educational goals, whether that be a certificate program, associate's, bachelor's, or even master's degree, which we've had a couple go on to get. One very easy change was to simply hang up posters about the FAFSA and other college resources around our office space and in our clubhouse, which is a drop-in center for our youth. It's a really small thing to do, but it may increase the likelihood of a youth engaging in a conversation or just asking questions about college in general and what their options are. In our clubhouse, we also have copies of each of the campus binders that I previously mentioned. So youth are able to browse through the binders and receive information on any of the 12 San Diego colleges and universities. We have also incorporated an education section in our agenda with our monthly staff meetings. So each time we meet, we're dedicating some time to just speak on education. We touch on resources, reminders about deadlines for FAFSA or other scholarship opportunities that are available. This is when we informed our staff that we would be participating in the Beyond the Safety Net FAFSA Challenge, and that we were aiming to have all of our students complete their FAFSA by the priority enrollment date. And having these topics just mentioned during our monthly staff meeting helped to build the college-going culture that we envisioned. Can we get the next slide, please? So here are some of the outcomes of our Beyond the Safety Net involvement and the changes that we implemented. First off, we found that the students feel more supported now. Our youth have quarterly satisfaction questionnaires that they complete, and these reports have shown us that our youth who have been enrolled in post-secondary education over the past year have felt an increase in support from our program staff. And additionally, our agency staff and the case managers have reported feeling more support as well. I think having the resource binders on each college and university helps ease the frustration of keeping track of the deadlines or which contact is at which college. And the use of the student checklist unites the case manager and the student in working together to have a successful semester. I think the youth can appreciate the continuous check-ins and the discussions around their education, and the staff can appreciate the use of having a concrete tool to ensure that they're covering all of the necessary bases for each student. Staff are able to bring those student checklists to CFT meetings with social workers and other supports, and also when they meet with me or other program managers, we check in on that checklist. So it's constantly being visited, and we're able to see where each student is doing well or where the student may need some additional support. Over the past year, there has also been a significant improvement in the number of students that are successfully completing their semesters, especially this past spring. We had a good turnout. And when I say successfully completing that, I mean they kept their GPA above a 2.0, they met financial aid requirements, and the youth were also more likely to address issues as they arose rather than after the fact when the damage was done. Lastly, we now have education-based resources and language in our policy and procedures manual. So new staff are informed during their initial training that we support post-secondary education and that we collaborate with foster liaisons at the various colleges and universities. Also including that education topic in our regular staff meetings has helped create a collaborative approach to supporting our youth in their education goals. It also allows for a platform for case managers to discuss barriers or any complications they may be having with a specific school or a process, and then receive feedback or suggestions from other staff members. Incorporating the topic of education in our staff meetings has also allowed for a lot of reminders about important deadlines. That I mentioned the FAFSA challenge that we did, and we actually had 100% of our students complete their applications for FAFSA by the priority deadline. So we will be using the prize money to host a back-to-school event for our youth next month, which is something we have not done in the past year, so we're looking forward to that. Overall, our agency implemented a few very small changes that have had a pretty significant impact on our students. I would encourage everyone to look at what your program currently has in place that supports foster youth in their education and see where you can improve. I think it's important for us to remember that many of the youth we work with were not raised in an environment where the opportunity or expectation of education was talked about. So for a lot of them, we may be the first people to even mention the possibility of college being in their future. And the more we can create an environment of support and have a team that feels competent and capable of supporting our youth in their education, then the more likely our youth are to actually put a plan in motion to attain a higher education. So that was our involvement in the cohort. And thank you, Amy and Simone, for having me on to share about our participation.
Thanks, Carol, so much for sharing your experience in the initiative. I really actually just enjoyed kind of listening and reflecting back on it. And we've had a question pop up, and they said, is it possible to get a copy of the checklist from San Diego so that we can modify it for our program? Would you be willing to share that with the registrants of the webinar, and I can send it out?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Yeah, so again, thank you, Carol. So we are now going to kind of shift to a different portion of our presentation and talk about what did we, because we really learned a lot from this initiative and we want to now apply it. So, you know, the good news here is, you know, so if we step back, you know, the initiative's coming to a close, a lot's been learned. Where do we go from here? How do we take what we've learned and really lift up the whole sector? The good news is that, you know, much of our recommendations are based on existing laws. We are not proposing to go past a whole bunch of new laws. I mean, maybe just a couple, but, you know, vastly, our recommendations are really proposing to work with existing law on implementation. Really, as a state, I think we've done a good job. We've done some good legislative work. Just as far as kind of in that arena. So it's kind of, you know, now let's take the laws that are on the books and make the most of them. And so that's really what a lot of our discussion today will focus on. So starting here, first, our finding is really that, as you may tell, you know, providers were enthusiastic about supporting youth with post-secondary education. So they did this on their own accord. As I mentioned earlier, there was, you know, no financial compensation. They did this really because they have a commitment to improving educational outcomes of the youth they serve. They understand the importance of college access. They needed resources to assist their staff in supporting youth with post-secondary ed, and they had an interest in contributing to statewide learning and policy change. So, you know, again, they were very enthusiastic about supporting youth with post-secondary education, kind of, but there is a however, you know, and the however is that, you know, post-secondary education services are being squeezed out by rising housing costs and higher service needs. So we did hear quite frequently during the initiative that it was challenging at times for some providers or with certain young people that they work with, kind of with the existing framework for the program, the existing kind of rate that these programs are paid, that it was a challenge to do some of these things. So we want to dive a little bit into that. You know, really, It's kind of providers want to do this, but they experience obstacles, one of them being that they're not always adequately compensated to do so. And there's two pieces to this. The first is, the cost of housing has increased by 50% since 2011. And when the cost of housing is taking up the entire rate that a program is paid, there's no funding to cover supportive services, including post-secondary education support. So, some providers actually privately fundraise to subsidize the THPP NMD or the THP Plus rate. And then some providers offer lighter touch services to kind of grapple with the limited funding that they have for staffing and other costs. And we don't want them to do that. We know that lighter touch services are not an option for a program that wants to adequately support youth with post-secondary education. So, when more staffing, time, and resources, or kind of if we look at the second box here about higher needs youth, the concept here is really, when more staffing and time and resources are put into serving youth with higher service needs, that's going to eat up time for supportive services that are viewed as non-critical or kind of the quote-unquote extras, right? And some people are seeing post-secondary education support as an extra. So there's the regional housing cost issue for providers in certain counties. And then there's an issue that affects youth kind of across the state if they have higher service needs. And that's really that it is more costly, quite frankly, to serve these young people. And understanding that, young people with higher service needs often do actually also need more support with post-secondary education than others. So really, when you look at this, when you step back, without considering really the true cost of serving higher needs youth, all youth in the program are going to be impacted because it's really shaving time off of everyone's case management. So kind of first we'll break down the issue here of high regional housing costs, and then on the next slide we'll talk about higher service needs. So I'm sure the question that comes to mind is, you're talking about specific counties or specific regions, how many counties actually have these high housing costs? So first, to start with THPP NMD, this is a foster care placement. So the rate's standard across the state. And this, this is problematic for THPP NMD because unique to most other foster care placements, where traditionally a youth is joining, an existing household or home, when we're talking about like family-based placements, different from those, THPP NMD is almost all private market rentals, which are acquired using the rate. So we know that in the majority of counties, the rate is sufficient to cover the cost of housing. However, in 18 counties, the fair market rent for what is half of a two-bedroom apartment exceeds the housing portion of the THPP NMD rate. So to kind of break those two components down a little bit, fair market rent, or FMR, is a system developed by HUD to determine the allowable rent level for individuals who participate in their Housing Choice Voucher program. So FMRs are gross rent estimates for all across the country, and all of California's counties have an FMR set by HUD. So when looking at it for the purpose of this, we use the FMR for a two-bedroom. We split it in half because the majority of the youth in these programs are housed in two bedrooms sharing with a roommate. Not all of them, but most of them. So, that's kind of where FMR comes into play. Now, when we talk about the housing portion of the THPP NMD rate, you can see at the bottom of the screen, the THPP NMD rate was developed based on a breakdown of $600 of the rate at the time it was developed, which was several years ago, being designated the housing portion of the rate. That $600 was 21.45% of the total rate at that time. And then the remaining portion, was intended to be used for admin and supportive services. So the work group that developed this rate when AB 12 was being implemented, they based it on existing THP Plus rates. So these two rates are, tied as far as when we think of this housing portion. So today, or, as of last fiscal year, which was a couple weeks ago, in 2018-19, the total housing portion of the THPP NMD rate using that 21.45% figure is $715.57. the total THPP NMG rate for this past fiscal year was $3,336. And the new rate, I should just clarify, I know Amy had mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, and someone submitted a question like, she mentioned that it was like 37 something. That was just a typo. It's in fact 3,474. So it was like the numbers were transposed. So don't feel alarmed. The ACL is what the ACL says. It says it's 3474. That is what it is. So sorry about that confusion. But basically, when we're talking about this recent fiscal year that ended a couple weeks ago, like I said, the housing portion of that rate is $715.57 of the total THPP NMD rate. So in 18 counties, half of a 2-bedroom FMR, so for one youth, is more than that $715.57. That's what this really comes down to. And so that's for THPP NMD. For THP Plus, the rate is not set by the state. THP Plus is a program for former foster youth. It's not a foster care placement. So the rate's set by the counties. And while in some counties the THP Plus rate is adequate and it's adjusted annually, in some it's not. So in these counties, providers, are struggling in many cases more than they maybe even are in THPP NMD. We definitely want to applaud the counties that are looking at local housing costs and talking with their providers about the real cost of providing this program and that are adjusting the amount annually, because in the end, as a county, we know you're going to see a much better result, when you invest appropriately in these services. So that's looking at kind of regional housing costs. When we shift to look at youth that have different service needs or different housing accommodation needs, some of them need a higher, some of them are literally more costly to provide services to, right? So, this impacts youth across the state. This is not a regional issue. This is something that all providers grapple with in all counties. There are, specific risk factors or specific attributes that make it such that, youth are literally more costly to serve. So who are these young people? We are talking about youth that have significant mental health needs, and or substance abuse service needs. We're talking about youth with developmental disabilities or learning disabilities. We are talking about victims and survivors of commercial sexual exploitation. We're talking certainly about custodial parents. And then we keep saying it's more costly. What is more costly? So examples are special housing accommodations. So maybe a 1-bedroom versus shared living. So if you think about the most literal examples, probably custodial parents require different housing accommodations because they have more than one person with them. We're talking about increased emergency or on-call staffing hours. Sometimes in the middle of the night, there are emergencies, just higher kind of staffing costs. We're talking about emergency moves to ensure safety. So having to act quickly and accommodate a young person in a different housing. And there's often, providers don't just have vacant apartments hanging around that they're paying the rent on, right? So this does become an issue. Sometimes it's an emergency hotel voucher for the night until we can find a new apartment for someone. Sometimes excessive property damage. We have, visitors that become problematic. And then obviously services related to and services for minor children of youth participants. And when you think about youth with the higher service needs, I think one thing that's hard to not mention is kind of just when we think about the spectrum of placements in extended foster care specifically. In extended foster care for youth without family-based care as an option, the SILP is really kind of the only other available placement because the only placement, with a higher service level really is the short-term residential therapeutic program, which are funded at a rate that's, more than triple what the THPP NMD rate is. And we know that NMDs are largely not in STRTPs. And so, not having any midway point between THPP NMD and STRTPs is just certainly not a kind of a realistic way of managing the placement needs of youth in extended foster care. So I think there's a lot of conversation to be had, and that's being had about kind of better equipping THPP NMD providers to meet a higher needs population, kind of as was intended when AB 12 was written. We can really see young people get the support they need with many things, including post-secondary education. So I just provided a mouthful, and we have a recommendation for THPP NMD and a recommendation for THP Plus. For THPP NMD, we recommend that a new rate methodology for THPP NMD be developed that considers the higher cost of serving youth with special needs and the vast regional variations in housing costs. So luckily, an opportunity for this is underway. AB 404, which passed a couple years ago, requires the California Department of Social Services to develop, implement, and maintain a rate setting methodology and rate schedule for THP providers by December 31st of this year. So we are really hopeful that stakeholders will come together with the state and we can all consider how to address what I just outlined, which is really twofold, an enhanced rate to accommodate youth with higher needs, and then a regional rate really for counties with extremely high housing costs. And, this would create equity. These youth should have access to supportive placements and an opportunity, to be supported with post-secondary education. So the next recommendation is regarding THP Plus. Like I said, counties set their own rates, and we recommend, kind of as we've discussed in previous years and on previous webinars, that counties set their THP Plus rates according to local housing and service costs and provide annual increases. So how would a county do this? So you kind of can see there on the slide, you look at your county's fair market rent. It's at that URL. You look at the 2-bedroom figure, you divide it in half, determine whether your FMR exceeds 21.45% of your current rate, and discuss service costs with your providers. So what does it really cost to run this program? You could also discuss housing costs with them, particularly in larger counties where there might be a real range of costs across the county, and then set a new THP Plus rate. And then consider an annual increase. And you could consider this according to the California Necessities Index. For 2019-20, the CNI increase for foster care placements is 4.15%, or you could use another mechanism, but some sort of annual increase. Orange County reconsidered their THP Plus rate a few years back and ended up increasing it. I certainly heard positive things about that. I think we want to definitely applaud, Orange County and all the other counties that have made these changes to when they think about what it costs to serve young people in their county and the young people that are in those programs. So, when we talk about this in terms of the initiative and in terms of post-secondary education, we really feel, one of the great supportive services that's provided in these programs and that's expected to be provided is post-secondary education. So we really want to make sure that when we're considering how to pay for these services, that we're keeping that in the forefront of our mind, that has to be a part of those supportive services. So the next finding is without involvement from county agencies, current and former foster and probation youth will not receive the necessary post-secondary education preparation and support. During Beyond the Safety Net, it became very clear of the importance of engaging county child welfare agencies and probation departments, and that was really a necessity for a number of reasons. First, in order to reach the entire foster care population, we've got to go beyond placements and really work with the agency. Prior to the passage of Senate Bill 12, there was no state requirement for county child welfare agencies or juvenile probation departments to ensure foster or out-of-home probation youth are prepared for post-secondary education. And there remains no federal requirement, even though foster care extends to age 21 in 22 states. And so SB 12 included a provision that starting at age 16, caseworkers must identify and list an individual in the youth case plan to help them complete applications for post-secondary education, including financial aid. This is a great first step. And one of the next steps we'll talk about on the slide is to ensure effective implementation. But this is really a great opportunity to engage the agencies in this process. Research has found that engaging child welfare agencies or engaging child welfare workers in preparing youth for college is very important. The Cal Youth study found that while youth's perceptions of their educational preparedness were not significantly related to the odds of entering college, that actually the perceptions of their child welfare workers were. Youth who were rated by their worker as being prepared or very prepared for college were significantly more likely to enroll in college than youth who were rated not prepared. So I think it's something to remember that this does make a difference. And then second, counties can either kind of encourage or discourage support for post-secondary education on behalf of providers and caretakers. So, if these agencies prioritize post-secondary education in their planning processes, as we've seen some of them do, and they're kind of in their policies and practices, it makes a huge difference. I'm sure not intentional, but an agency could disincentivize or even create obstacles to supporting youth of post-secondary education. So, for example, they could enforce work requirements for students or, barriers to entrance into the program. So the recommendation here is that county child welfare agencies and probation departments really should implement SB 12 to ensure effective implementation of SB 12 and to emphasize post-secondary education among providers. Again, SB 12 went into effect the first of the year 2018 and includes a provision that starting at age 16, caseworkers must identify and list an individual in the youth case plan to help them complete applications for post-secondary education, including financial aid. And we know that counties need resources to do this. So we really want to see that implementation is done effectively. We also think counties should consider other ways they can emphasize post-secondary education in foster care placements. So some examples are requiring training on post-secondary education for resource families. You may have tuned in recently. We had a webinar on how LA County has incorporated post-secondary education into their RFA training requirements for all of their families. 3 out of those 8 hours that are required must be on higher ed if they have a youth between 12 and 19. So that's really something great that we think that other counties could do. Another is including measures of post-secondary education and reporting requirements. We don't know how we're doing in an area until we measure it, so that's always a good start. And then lastly, counties can consider what services they emphasize in their contracts with THP Plus programs, or if they have contracts with THPP NMD providers with them as well. So, we've talked a lot about foster youth and out-of-home probation youth now. Now we're going to talk a little bit about youth who may not be systems involved, but who experience homelessness. So the next finding is really that post-secondary education is largely absent from the homelessness response system. Homeless youth providers, reported lacking connection to campus's AB 801 liaisons that are tasked with assisting and referring homeless students. This is really a symptom of a larger systemic problem. For homeless youth, it's a little trickier than for foster youth. They're not necessarily connected to a system, but many are being served by homeless youth providers. And so kind of one question we had was how connected to the local colleges are the homeless continuums of care, which are the entities charged with administering HUD funding and some state funding to address homelessness. So we actually administered a survey last December to continuums of care across the state. And one of the things we asked was how engaged they were with their local post-secondary education institutions. And over half indicated there was no formal engagement. So we really see this as an area of growth and opportunity, both on the homeless youth service system side and on the post-secondary education sector side, because we all also know from a survey that was administered by the California Homeless Youth Project that 82% of respondents to a survey of college-level staff indicated housing is the need they're least able to provide the students. So we know that that connection is needed. People want it. And so our recommendation is that homeless continuums of care should use their role kind of as community conveners to improve post-secondary education outcomes of homeless youth. First, engage local post-secondary education institutions, especially community colleges, in the continuum of care. Some examples of how continuums of care can engage their local post-secondary education institutions are one, something that LA is doing. The Los Angeles Homelessness Services Authority, LAHSA, which is LA's continuum of care, convenes a higher education work group where they bring together homeless youth providers and campuses and other key stakeholders to discuss this very issue. And it creates partnerships and it talks about obstacles, what they can do on either side. And in the lease, it's ensuring that the two sectors are talking and informed. Second, they can emphasize addressing post-secondary education outcomes in local homeless planning processes. So, for example, continuums of care are about to statewide receive $650 million of funding to address homelessness through the Homeless Housing Assistance and Prevention Program, or HAP, and at least 8% of that, which is $52 million, must be used to address youth homelessness. So, this is an example of an opportunity to consider how to emphasize post-secondary education for homeless youth among the providers that they're funding through HAP, that they will be funding through HAP. And we've seen some communities begin to do this during the last round of funding for HEAP, the Homeless Emergency Aid Program, and also through other homeless youth funding, like the demonstration program. And then there's also some new state funding coming to post-secondary institutions to address college student homelessness, and that's a great opportunity for providers to partner with their campuses about offering housing interventions for homeless students, like college-focused rapid rehousing. So really another great partnership opportunity there. So now I'm going to turn it over to Amy, and she's going to walk us through our remaining kind of lessons learned and policy implications.
Thank you, Simone. Really appreciate that. There's a lot there, and we're excited about where the direction is going for the future. I'm going to present briefly, I think, on one, possibly two more findings, and then we're going to turn it over to Q&A. So really, the finding we heard, and again, all of this is over 3 years of conversations with our 37 organizations that participated, is it's very clear that there is no statewide accountability for the enforcement of what little post-secondary education requirements there are. The requirement is very light. They are required, as you see on the left-hand side, THPP, NMD, and PLUS. They are required to provide post-secondary education support, but the regulations don't adequately outline these services, which make them virtually unenforceable. They're so broadly written, so expansive, it would be almost impossible for the state to say, we want to enforce these, we want to ensure you're doing them. And so we're left with a system where, providers who want to do them or see there's some value in doing them, but those who don't. And so a very scattered shot, inconsistent approach. For homeless providers, as you can see from the middle circle, there's no state requirement whatsoever. I mean, largely because there's no state funding. So what we have right now is very modest program, about $1 million a year is given to a small subset of homeless youth providers. As Simone said before, HEAP funding last year and now HAP funding this year, but there is no state requirement around post-secondary education in that. And then thirdly, there's no formal collection of post-secondary educational outcomes on these populations, not in foster care or for homeless youth. And so we just really learned that, again, it's really left largely to the provider who has taken an interest in this, who has young people who've advocated for it. But as a state, we have a long way to go around ensuring that every young person has access to a collection of consistent services to move them towards post-secondary education. So you're probably not going to be surprised that our recommendations have to do with this. First is around THPP NMD. So we're delighted the Department of Social Services has convened a work group that's worked for some time on revising the regulations, and the proposed regulations are much more specific. They're in the process of being amended and reissued, and they go way above and beyond just, they shall provide post-secondary education support. A lot of very specific components are detailed, And so our recommendation is to see those included in the final in the regulations that are issued, and then to couple that with intensive and consistent technical assistance and training to the providers, so that they understand exactly what these mean. I mean, you could hear when we were talking about the impact that this has had on new alternatives, the level of of familiarity with all of the financial aid terms, with all of the academic planning terms. We need to have every THPP NMD licensed provider able to speak with that level of ease and authority if we're really going to improve access to post-secondary education. The next recommendation around this is to ensure that newly available funding that may be coming from the state includes these requirements. SB 918 went into effect last year, the Homeless Youth Act of 2018, and it calls on the Homelessness Coordinating and Financing Council to develop explicit goals related to youth homelessness and to measure progress towards those goals. And so let's start right from the beginning, and let's not sidestep post-secondary education. Let's not treat it as a bell and whistle, and not pretend that any homeless youth has any chance of economic security without some form of post-secondary education. So we have a real opportunity starting with this new mandate that came from SB 918 and hopefully newly available funding that will accompany it. The next recommendation related to this one has to do with the Department of Education should develop a mechanism for data sharing that allows the full implementation of reporting requirements on foster youth transitioning to college. So a number of years ago, Assemblymember Weber authored Assembly Bill 854. And again, as Simone says, we've got lots of good laws on the books, and this is one of them. This really said extended foster care goes till 21. Now we are going to require the provision of post-secondary education preparation and support services. And it does call on the collection of education data, including post-secondary education data. However, that's not currently being reported on. And so we are recommending that the Department of Education, and it is possible. It's absolutely possible. Sometimes it's like, well, we'd love to collect it, but we don't know how. But the Department of Education, we're recommending work with CalPass Plus, which is a system that actually measures post-secondary education outcomes. And essentially, the way I look at it is we figured this out for LCFF. Now we integrated those two major data systems. Now we need to do it for post-secondary education. It hasn't happened, but it's a recommendation that we're making moving forward. And then our final recommendation also relates to the California Department of Education and the County Offices of Education. And that requirement is really to institutionalize the work that's been done over the last several years on the California Foster Youth FAFSA Challenge. And this has been, I mean, talk about inspiring, the 52 counties, again, like 52 of the 58 counties have voluntarily opted in to a campaign to increase the rates of FAFSA completion. We just completed our second year, and again, these counties are going above and beyond to make sure that all of the seniors who are in high school have completed their FAFSA. But we're in a similar situation as we're into with Beyond the Safety Net. We know they want to do it. We know they can do it. But now we have to really put in place the policies to institutionalize the practice, to make sure that it goes from a we'll do it because we want to do it when we can do it, to this is a statewide practice that's available for every youth across the state. And so we're very excited about the progress that's been made. The goal of the challenge is to ensure that foster youth in high school complete the FAFSA at the same rate as high school seniors generally. This year, the rate of FAFSA completion was 53% among the 52 counties that participated, which was pretty darn close to the 60% rate of all high school seniors in California. So, we really covered a lot. Before we go to Q&A, just kind of want to put up, if you want, we did do a report in 2017 that looked at the results from our pilot But I think with that, let's go straight on into Q&A. There's a lot of really great questions we have here, and we'll do our best with the time remaining to go through as many of them as possible. All right, here's one for you, Simone. Maybe you can kick us off. Did the housing providers sometimes discover that some campuses did not have an obvious or clear partner? Are there such potential partners found on all campuses in California?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say for foster youth, there is certainly robust support at many campuses across the state. And to start, every community college has a foster youth liaison, an FYSI liaison. And at a minimum, they have that. We also have several campuses across the state with what were called CAFEs, now called Next Up campus support programs within EOPS. And those are support programs specifically for foster youth. They are state funded, and they're across many campuses across our state. And then there are also a number of Guardian Scholars programs and other similarly named programs that are not state funded, but that have been running for many years and that are specifically for current and former foster youth. And so if you go to the California College Pathways website, cacollegepathways.org, you can actually do a search for these programs. You can see which campuses have Next Up programs, and you can also look at the roster of FYSI liaisons, and you can literally search by campus to see who is the foster youth contact at this campus, what is the support program. So it was not hard to figure out who those people were on those campuses and connect them to the providers. I think the heavier lift was establishing that relationship. So, we did a lot of individual technical assistance on, let's look at this step by step. You're not currently connected to your contact at the campus. The first step is let's do some cross-learning. They learn about what your program provides, you learn about what they provide, and let's set up regular times that you communicate about students that you have in common and how to wrap services around those students. So that was really the process that we used. For homeless youth, it's, there is the support is not as robust, but there are AB 801 liaisons required across the state at campuses. So I would say that's more still in an implementation phase, and there's work to be done there, but certainly want to make sure that homeless youth providers are connected to those individuals.
Hi, this next question is for Carol. Carol, would you say that your effort in Beyond the Safety Net, I guess the person is asking, do you think it resulted in any changes or improvements on the part of the campus-based program? How did the nature of your relationship change as you got to know them, and do you think it impacted their practice in any way?
That's a great question. We were already familiar with some of the contacts on some of the campuses that a lot of our youth go to a few more than the other ones. So a lot of it was meeting brand new people that we've never worked with before and inviting them out to us, which it did, I think, impact their ability to work with the youth because they learned what all we provide, like Simone was just mentioning. What resources do we give? Do we provide bus passes? Do they provide bus passes, book vouchers, and that sort of thing? So we were able to connect, and I think it did help them because we had all of our youth sign releases that we could, work together with them, and we let them know we want to come to the counseling meetings, their EOPS meetings, and we want to be a part of that. So I think it did help improve the way we both work with one another.
Thank you very much. The next question is about the work requirement. They're very curious about that. And Carol, I'd like to keep the question on you. Can you tell us about your work requirement, whether or not you changed it, and how you think about it in terms of supporting post-secondary education?
Well, we are very fortunate in San Diego County that it is not a requirement to have students be employed. So we did not have to make any changes to that. On our end, we have in our county where if a youth is attending school full-time, which is 12 units or more, then they are meeting the productivity requirement of being full-time. So we didn't have to make any changes in that. I do think that we've seen, as far as income, the youth that are in extended foster care that get a monthly allowance, they are not as stressed about having, their basic needs met. Where are they going to get their next meal? Where are they going to get a bus pass? So having that income does help them. We see that the youth that are getting that monthly allowance are able to focus more on school than youth that are just in the regular THP Plus program and maybe need to have that income, and school doesn't become a priority. But our county, like I said, we're very fortunate we don't have that requirement.
Okay, thank you. Another question was about holiday breaks, and the, if we can say again on you, Carol, I mean, as a housing provider, the young people you serve are housed, and just so the issue of holiday breaks would not be really, I guess, a factor. And so I guess the question is, are steps being taken to ensure that housing and placement bridges the gap of holiday breaks when campuses are closed? And so I'll touch on that quickly, just in that, this initiative focused on training the housing providers how to integrate post-secondary education supports. And so fortunately, all of the young people in these organizations don't face those challenges when it comes to holiday breaks. But I will stay with you, Carol, on this one. It's a question, I don't know if you know the answer, but did liaisons, the AB 801 liaisons that you work with in San Diego County, did they have a technological option for schedule retrievals? How did you work with campuses to understand the schedules of the students in your programs?
Well, working directly with them, like I mentioned, we have a staff member that is kind of the expert on each college. So they're the main connect person to contact the liaisons and get the important dates and schedules for the midterms and final exams and drop dates. And that's what you're referring to, I'm guessing, with the deadlines you're mentioning?
Yes.
Yeah. So having that one contact point person to be the expert on the school, working directly with that liaison to get that information, and then also using that student checklist with the staff member working directly with the student to see with the syllabus where is the midterm, when is each final exam, and having it specific to that student checklist so that the staff and student are both aware of the upcoming deadlines.
All right, I'm going to ask this one for you, Simone. The person writing the question is looking at the really low barrier practice around, promoting a college-going culture, noting that while there were big increases, they're so kind of easy. Why aren't they 100%? What would be? Well, we don't have a crystal ball, but you literally provided hundreds of hours of TA. What's your understanding of why 100% of programs didn't implement those low barrier practices?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll start with just, programs at the beginning of the initiative, they set goals based on the core practice model and based on what they observed to be the key things they wanted to do in their program. So we kind of thought of it as kind of a sampler platter. There's 8 practice areas. Some of you may be wanting to do all of them. Some of you may be wanting to do 7 out of 8. Some of you may be 5 out of 8. And so we really individualized the technical assistance we provided and the work we did with them based on, this. We're telling you here are some practices, but we're not going to literally tell you everything you have to do. I mean, this has to be something that works within your existing program and that you are excited about. So, people picked and chose what they thought was best for their program. So not every program had the goal of making a visual space in their program that was focused on post-secondary education, although many did. So I'd say that's probably the kind of best explanation as of why isn't that 100%. I'll also say that this initiative, these results are from kind of after training had concluded, but a number of programs continued to make progress in that second year. It was very technical assistance heavy that second year, focused on what goals are remaining. Now that you've gotten a lot of the training and learned what more do you want to do. And so these numbers are from, last September 2018.
Thank you. This next comment in question, I think, really gets to the heart really gets to the heart of the challenge. And it is many youth in foster care are several or more grades below grade level and have significant learning disabilities and years of school failure. These factors significantly impede their ability to benefit from college readiness services when they are provided. Please discuss how these challenges can be better addressed so that college readiness services will be more effective. And again, I think this person really got to the heart of it, which is, you know, how do we do that? How do we meet young people where they are at and move them in this direction? I'm going to just say a few things about that. Then I actually would like Carol and Simone to both speak to that. Carol has actually faced this challenge in her program, and Simone can maybe complement it with some of the other things she's heard from other programs. The one thing that I will add before I turn it over to them is the time, the amount of time for young people to be in post-secondary education, particularly foster youth, has been significantly increased due to the Cal Grant being eligible from 4 to 8 years. And so they are not required with this extra time, and this is a policy change that went into effect on January 1st, actually, of this year. They are not required to get on that wheel and spin it as fast as everyone else. That policy change was due to the acknowledgement of exactly what you're commenting in your point, which is not all of them, but many of them, and at least some of them, have these very powerful experiences that put them in a different situation. And so one is, let's kind of give them the course of study and the time they need to begin post-secondary education. So again, and that's from 4 to 8 years of full-time enrollment. So if a student is part-time enrollment, that is even more time. So no one is saying they should, go to community college, enroll in 12, 14, or 18 units of school. So that's just kind of one policy change that I wanted to make sure made it into the conversation. And Carol, why don't I turn it over to you from here? I'm sure you've had just this profile, a young person. We're not talking about, Sally and Biff. These are young people who have really had trauma and some real educational challenges. So I know it's a longer answer than we probably have time for, but when you hear that, what comes to mind as you work with these students to get them ready for college success?
Well, what comes to mind is that that's just one of the barriers, is that maybe they didn't get, the education that others have gotten that are attending college. And there's also mental health issues to address, or their basic needs not being met, or a stressful situation with their roommate that they're placed with in their housing program, or, whatever's going on, substance use. There's just so many layers to it that our youth face that, the day-to-day, they may not even be focused when they show up at school, if they even show up at all. So I think having the connection with the on-campus supports and being connected with them, we get the feedback. I've gotten 2 calls just this week from one of the EOPS counselors saying they were concerned about one of the youth in our program that wasn't showing up, hadn't been in touch. So having just that connection and knowing who on campus has eyes and ears on that student is important. I think also just keeping it very individualized with each youth and recognizing where one is at is not where another is, and that maybe they can only take 1 class per semester, and maybe that's enough for them. And it will, like you said, maybe drag out for 4 to 6 to 8 years for them to get an associate's, which is okay as long as they're continuing to move forward. I think for us, also recognizing that a community college or a 4-year university isn't necessarily the ideal for some of our youth. Maybe it's a trade school or a vocational program where they can get certified in something in under a year, and then they can be on their way with a career. So I think just keeping it individualized and kind of having a wraparound approach with the on-campus supports is all we can really do to just best support the youth as much as we can.
Thanks, Carol. This is Simone. I'll just kind of add on, obviously there's implications, earlier education implications here of preparing foster youth. But I think where we are today, youth are coming into these programs, quite frankly, some of these young people maybe can't read or, have some real serious setbacks. So where we are today, I think the best thing to think about is, and Carol touched on some of this, but the community college is a place where there really is kind of something for everybody. So you don't have to go one route. You don't have to go transfer to a four-year degree, get a four-year degree, transfer to a four-year school. There's many different routes to meet various kind of interests that youth have. You can do career education. You can do license. You can do a number of different things at the community college. So I'll say that, that, like Carol said, it has to be individualized. And I'll also say we really need to turn to disabled student services and see how we can engage young people in those services. I know there's stigma, but we have to find ways to move past that. DSPS at the community colleges are really great programs, and if you do have young people that are experiencing like learning disabilities based on trauma or based on whatever it is, these programs can really provide supports for young people who do want to participate in post-secondary education.
Great. Given the time, we'll just do a question or more. One question was, I think, or comment too, is foster youth have 4 to 8 years to finish college, but who pays for their housing expenses for up to 8 years after high school? Up to age 26, can they receive full financial aid for living expenses? So just a few points to add. One is, as if you're in foster care on or after age 13, you are an independent student, so you are eligible for full financial aid. Ideally a young person would participate in care till 21, so that takes you till 21. And then THP Plus, which is a 2-year program in I think 28 counties, it has been extended an additional year if young people are enrolled in school. And so that is another support. So the other thing I would say, it's just important for people to know, is that foster care is not counted against financial aid. So let's say someone is in a THP Plus program or in a SILP, they're fully eligible for that benefit. So for SILP now, that's $12,000 a year. Their full financial aid, which, depending on if they're going to a UC or a CSU, the CHAFE, so again, when we start to add these things up, it's a lot more money than you might imagine, and it's a lot more money than they're earning. We know that from the Cal Youth study, but it does require a lot of careful, detailed work. It doesn't just snap into place. It's far from that. And then maybe a last question was any stats about how many foster youth enroll in post-secondary education and the kind of retention or dropout rate. We can definitely include that in the follow-up material. The bottom line is the Cal Youth study has shown, of all of the outcomes of extended foster care, one of the most impactful, so number one is homelessness, and number two is post-secondary education enrollment. However, enrollment and retention are two different things. Getting enrolled and staying enrolled require two different skill sets, as Carol emphasized. And so again, it's great that more are getting enrolled, but if it's not being parlayed into a degree, then that is not as good. So there's a lot of work to go to complete as a state. And I just want to conclude again by acknowledging everyone who's on the web seminar today. You're here obviously because you want to see post-secondary education gains for foster youth, and really thanking the California Wellness Foundation, which supported the Beyond the Safety Net initiative, and the 37 providers who participated, again, totally voluntarily, which we really can't say enough. We learned a tremendous amount from you. We're going to keep working together, but instead of providing the individual technical assistance and training, it will be to pursue these recommendations, which we reviewed in the second half of the presentation. So with that, it concludes this morning's web seminar. Thank you very much for your time, and have a great day.